Did you know the Roman Empire produced warriors and leaders so feared that even their own men trembled when hearing their names? Tonight, we're counting down the 10 most feared generals of Rome, figures whose victories, brutality, and genius shaped not only an empire, but the entire course of world history. And trust me, watch until number 1, because the general who tops this list wasn't just feared by Rome's enemies. He was feared by Rome itself. Let's start with number 10, Gaius Marius. Born in 157 BC, Marius wasn't born into wealth or noble privilege, but he clawed his way into Roman politics through sheer determination. He revolutionized the Roman military by recruiting landless citizens into the legions, offering them pay, weapons, and the promise of land after service. That decision turned the Roman army from a citizen militia into a professional war machine. Enemies feared him for his relentless campaigns against Jugurtha in North Africa, and later against the invading Cimbri and Teutonese tribes that had once humiliated Rome. Marius crushed them so brutally that survivors were sold into slavery by the tens of thousands. His reforms made him a hero to soldiers, but a terror to Rome's enemies. But Marius's story sets the stage for an even more dangerous man, Lucius Cornelius Sulla. If Marius built the army into a professional force, Sulla showed Rome what happens when that force answers to one man alone. He was ruthless, brilliant, and perhaps the first Roman general who truly proved that the loyalty of soldiers could outweigh the authority of the Senate. In 88 BC, when political enemies tried to strip him of command, Sulla did the unthinkable. He marched his legions on Rome itself. No Roman general had ever dared do that before. He stormed the city streets, executed his rivals, and declared himself dictator. Under his rule, prescriptions were introduced, lists of enemies condemned to death, whose heads were literally displayed in the Forum. Even in 2025, historians continued to debate his legacy. Was he saving Rome from chaos, or turning it into a dictatorship? What we know for sure is that Sulla made his name synonymous with fear, both inside and outside the empire. Next on our list is Pompey the Great. If there was ever a general who embodied both glory and fear, it was Pompey. Rising to power in the chaotic years after Sulla's dictatorship, Pompey earned the nickname Magnus the Great before he was even 30. He wasn't just feared by Rome's enemies, but also by Rome itself, because his victories came so quickly and so decisively. In Hispania, he crushed the remnants of the Marian rebels. Then, in the east, he cleared the Mediterranean of pirates in only 3 months, a feat that terrified opponents who had long relied on piracy to resist Rome's trade dominance. His most feared campaigns came against Mithridates VI, the so-called Poison King of Pontus, who had slaughtered tens of thousands of Romans in Asia Minor. Pompey crushed him, expanding Rome's reach deep into Asia. By the time he returned home, he was hailed as a new Alexander, but also whispered about as a man whose power rivaled the Republic itself. In 2025, new archaeological research in Turkey has revealed further traces of Pompey's eastern campaigns, underscoring just how far his shadow stretched. If Pompey was feared for his brilliance, Marcus Licinius Crassus was feared for something much darker, his brutality. Known as the wealthiest man in Rome, Crassus used his fortune to buy influence and power, but he carved his reputation in blood. His most infamous campaign was against Spartacus and the rebel slaves of the Third Servile War. While Spartacus terrified Rome by leading gladiators and slaves to victory after victory, it was Crassus who finally crushed the rebellion, and he did so with a level of cruelty that stunned even his contemporaries. He lined the Appian Way with 6,000 crucified slaves' bodies hanging for miles as a gruesome warning to anyone who dared challenge Rome again. Enemies feared his ruthlessness, but ironically, his ambition outstripped his skill. In 53 BC, Crassus marched against the Parthians, hoping for glory to match Pompey and Caesar. Instead, he led his army into disaster at Carrhae, where Roman Legions were annihilated by Parthian horse archers. Crassus himself met a gruesome death, remembered as one of Rome's greatest humiliations. Even so, his name still evokes the terror of crucifixion and the weight of Rome's iron hand against rebellion. Germanicus is often remembered as one of Rome's most beloved generals. But make no mistake, he was also one of its most feared. Adopted into the Julio-Claudian dynasty, Germanicus made his name avenging Rome's greatest humiliation, the massacre of 3 legions in the Teutoburg forest. For years, the memory of that disaster haunted Rome, but Germanicus marched into Germania with fire in his heart. He hunted down Arminius, the Germanic chieftain responsible, and unleashed brutal reprisals. Villages were burned, tribes were crushed, and prisoners were executed as living sacrifices to Rome's honor. His victories restored Roman pride, but struck terror across the Rhine. In fact, Germanic mothers used his name as a threat to scare their children into obedience. Even today, in 2025, excavations in Germany continue to uncover battle sites linked to his campaigns, reminding us just how far he spread Rome's fearsome shadow into the wild forests of the North. Now, let's talk about Trajan, one of Rome's greatest emperors and conquerors. If Germanicus avenged a loss, Trajan embodied victory itself. Rising to power in the late 1st century, Trajan pushed Rome to its territorial peak. His most famous and feared campaigns were against the Dacians, a powerful people led by King Decebalus, in what is now Romania. The Dacians were fierce warriors, but Trajan was relentless. His 2 wars against them were brutal, involving sieges, massacres, and the systematic destruction of their fortresses. When he finally won, he didn't just defeat Dacia, he wiped it off the map as an independent power. To celebrate, he erected Trajan's Column in Rome, a monument that still spirals upward today, carved with scenes of slaughter and conquest. His enemies feared his discipline, his soldiers adored him, and even Rome's Senate stood in awe of his victories. Modern 2025 analysis using 3D scanning has revealed even more detail in the carvings of Trajan's Column, showing the merciless efficiency of his war machine. Trajan wasn't just a general, he was the conqueror who turned fear into an empire's legacy. Septimius Severus may not be the first name people think of when it comes to Rome's most feared generals, but his enemies knew him as a man who never forgot betrayal. Rising from Africa to seize power in 193 CE, Severus built his empire through ruthless military discipline. When rival claimants challenged him, he crushed them without mercy, marching his armies across the empire in lightning campaigns. He burned their capital of Ctesiphon and sold its population into slavery, leaving behind a trail of devastation. He made no secret of his beliefs, famously advising his sons to enrich the soldiers and scorn all others. It was a chilling warning that showed where his loyalties truly lay. By the time of his death in 211 CE, Severus had left Rome stronger, but also bloodier than ever before. Even in 2025, historians studying his campaigns describe him as a general who blended brilliance with cruelty, an emperor whose shadow loomed dark across 2 continents. If Severus embodied cold calculation, Aurelian was Rome's iron fist. Known as Restitutor, Orbis, the restorer of the world, Aurelian came to power in a time when Rome was falling apart. The empire had split into fragments, with breakaway states in Gaul and the East, and enemies pressing at the borders. Most generals would have buckled under the weight of such chaos, but not Aurelian. He launched campaign after campaign, crushing barbarian invasions, defeating the Palmyrene queen Zenobia, and reconquering lost territories. His enemies called him the Hand of Steel for his speed and brutality. After retaking the East, he paraded Zenobia in chains through Rome as a living symbol of his power. His reign was short, but his impact was seismic. Rome, once fractured, stood united and feared again. Recent 2025 archaeological digs in Palmyra have uncovered inscriptions praising Zenobia's resistance. Yet they also testify to the terror Aurelian unleashed on those who opposed him. His message was clear: defy Rome and face annihilation. Julius. Caesar's name echoes through history as both a statesman and a general. But for his enemies, he was a nightmare in human form. His campaigns in Gaul turned vast regions of Europe into killing fields. He annihilated entire tribes, slaughtered men in the tens of thousands, and sold women and children into slavery. His genius lay not only in his tactics like his daring river crossings and use of siege engines but also in his psychological warfare. Caesar wanted fear to precede him, so when his legions marched, resistance often crumbled before the first spear was thrown. His enemies painted him as a butcher, but to his soldiers he was a godlike figure, sharing their hardships and rewarding their loyalty. Even in 2025, researchers using an AI-driven analysis of his commentaries on the Gallic Wars have noted how he carefully shaped his image, masking brutality with glory, making conquest sound like destiny. For Rome, he was a hero. For Gaul, he was terror incarnate. And then there is Scipio Africanus, perhaps the most feared Roman general of them all. His rise came during one of Rome's darkest hours, the war against Hannibal of Carthage. Hannibal had shattered Rome's legions and left the Republic trembling. But Scipio was different. He studied Hannibal's strategies, learned from Rome's defeats, and then turned the tables. Leading Roman forces into North Africa, Scipio forced Hannibal to return home, culminating in the legendary Battle of Zama in 202 BCE there. Scipio's tactics, using manipulative formations to neutralize Hannibal's war elephants, delivered Rome its greatest victory. Hannibal himself admitted that Scipio was the better general, an acknowledgement that sealed his legacy. To Carthage, Scipio was destruction given flesh. To Rome, he was salvation. Today in 2025, military historians still study his campaigns as a masterclass in adaptation, discipline, and psychological dominance. He wasn't just feared in his time, he's still revered and feared in the study of war centuries later.